Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, I catch up with Cari Corozza of New View Strategies for a conversation that closes the loop on her recent article and presentation on new features in Dynamics 365 Business Central. Cari shares her views on how to assess the semi-annual update, what's exciting about it, what's more ordinary. We also discuss some of the questions and comments raised during her presentation. And we discuss what Cari and the New View Strategies team will be doing to actually deploy these updates to Business Central customers this spring and summer. All right. Well, hey, Cari, thanks for joining today.
Yeah, thanks, Jason, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this is the next and perhaps final phase of a really nice look you've been taking at, various features that are coming up in the newest release wave for Dynamics 365 Business Central. You've written an article looking at a couple of them, and then you did a really well-received, I would say, webcast looking at those features and even several others. And I thought we could use this time to just talk a little more about what you presented and some of the response we've had from people who were at the event and so forth. So maybe just to start, can you give just a little introduction of who you are and what some of your focus areas are?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Cari, and I'm a trainer and consultant with New View Strategies. And my background is a very heavy finance and accounting background. So I really love anything around accounts payable, month end, year end reporting, those types of things. And specifically, I know that Microsoft has a lot of really cool features coming out that accountants can be really excited about, but there's a lot out there as well that everyone can be excited about. So I know that in my article and my webcast that you mentioned, I think in both of them I compared April for the Microsoft releases kind of to Christmas time. Because to me, it really is just that exciting where, you're getting these features that you might have asked for at some point and you don't even remember, or, there's just some features in there that other users requested. And it's just a really exciting time to see what's out there and how Microsoft is trying to make our lives a little bit easier as end users. So I've been using, Nav Business Central for quite a while, and I've definitely seen all these improvements kind of coming into the system. And there are a lot of areas that they really have improved upon.
Yeah, when I saw that you were using the describing it or comparing it to Christmas, I thought, those are first of all, you love you're definitely passionate about accounting and finance, but also are these really standout improvements this time around in this release wave? How do you kind of weigh it against previous release waves you've seen in terms of the kind of features that are going to benefit accountants?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that each of these different wave releases kind of has its own, what I like to call Christmas presents of plain white socks. So it's things that are very practical functionality. They'll make our lives a little bit easier, but they're not as showy as some of the other features may be. And then we also have, usually with each release, one or two for our end users, what I call the shiny new bike. So it's something that is really exciting. You can't wait to start using, and you can't wait to show off to your friends or colleagues. So we do have a couple of those shiny new bike features when it comes to dimensions in Business Central. And some of them, I think, are features that accountants and end users and anyone who's using dimensions or doing reporting and using these data tags have been waiting for just years and years and years. So should I start getting into the nitty gritty of a couple of those features, or should we talk a little bit more about general things first?
Yeah, please do. I'd be interested to know more about on dimensions and maybe then how users will actually be preparing to take advantage of some of these things. So why don't you start with some of the dimensions updates?
For sure. So there are two really exciting shiny new bike dimension features. And one of them is that controllers or admin, whoever is setting the dimensions up and default dimensions, will actually be able to exercise more control over those settings and a little bit more control on what users are able to enter for dimensions. So basically, if we are trying to restrict our dimensions on a GL account, so let's say we have an expense account, which typically we would require maybe a department dimension for. So you have an expense and you want to associate it with a specific department. Maybe we have 4 dimensions for departments set up, but for a certain GL account, we've only budgeted for it in 2 of those dimensions. what the admin or controller can actually do now is say that for this GL account, we only want the user to be able to enter these 2 department dimensions. So we know we've budgeted for it in these 2 dimensions. We only want them to be able to pick these. There's something that's called an allowed values filter field now for dimensions, which allows that admin or that controller to basically specify the dimensions that they want the user to be able to select from. So this is something that it still allows flexibility for the user in that they're still, choosing between the dimensions as they normally would, but the dimensions that they're choosing from are now limited so that they're not maybe accidentally choosing the wrong one and there are less corrections needed at month end. So this really just allows a little bit more control over entries and transactions that are posting with these data tags in the system.
So this sounds like something where when it's introduced, if you don't do anything, you just don't use this additional control. But if you know about it and you see the value in it, a user with the right permissions can go in and start setting up some of these controls. Is that how this will work?
That is 100% accurate. Yeah. So as you mentioned, if users don't know that this change is going in there, this additional feature, they won't know to take advantage of it. So that's actually a great point. And that's why I'm glad that we're getting these articles out there in the webcasts, the podcasts, because when I was a user, 6 years ago, I didn't know that there were all these different releases. I just was using the system and maybe we were doing an upgrade or I saw something new one day and I was like, oh, well, this is pretty cool. But I think a lot of users aren't aware that these wave releases are happening and that there are some really big, feature enhancements, I'll call them, in there. And then the other kind of dimension feature that I'd like to talk about, this one for me really is the most exciting, and I think that a lot of users will be very excited about it as well. Say that you do have a transaction that posts with an incorrect dimension. This new feature actually allows the user, based on, permissions and other settings, to go into a posted transaction in the general ledger and either add a dimension, remove a dimension, or edit a dimension value. So this is something that never before have we been able to do. And as accountants, we see all the transactions flowing into the system. And if something is wrong, even if we didn't enter it, we're the ones that kind of get stuck fixing it. So on the front end, now we have the ability to set up more control over which dimensions are being chosen. But now we also have the ability to correct dimensions on general ledger transactions, as opposed to having to do a reclassing journal entry or something like that. So this functionality, I think, Microsoft was very intentional with the way that they added it into the system. So I've actually been working in a preview sandbox environment with this new Wave 1 release functionality. So I tested through this function quite a bit. And the user has to be very intentional about going in. They're going to be very aware that they're changing a dimension, because I know that there was some concern around, well, if we make it easy for users to change dimensions, we're changing this data that's already in the system. Are we going to have an audit trail?
Right.
How do we prevent users from posting it? So Microsoft has also allowed some additional controls that admin can place around these dimension corrections. And you can see a change log at any time of the changes that have been made to dimensions, as well as revert dimensions. And for any controllers or accountants, these dimension changes can also be required to respect closed accounting periods, which is very exciting for us, because if we've already done our month-end reporting, we don't want anybody going back and changing data. So Microsoft has added the ability to be able to change these posted transactions, but also controls around dictating, when these can be done and what dimensions they can be done to.
Interesting. So, again, going back to sort of what this means for users, it seems like something that could be rolled out with all these controls, or if you're not aware of it or not ready to configure it, perhaps, I don't know. It just, nothing will happen. Is that right?
Yeah. And again, it's all permissions based as well. So depending on what permissions, users have now, they might actually have the ability to go in and do that if they do know it exists.
Okay.
So I'd say it would be important for companies to make sure that if they're going to have users using this, that they are placing the proper controls on the general ledger, on their dimensions, to restrict anything they need to. So, but yeah, as you mentioned, I mean, if you don't start using this in your system, nothing is really going to change for you. But I would highly recommend taking advantage of this feature because it's really cool and it makes month end so much less painful and a whole lot less transactions to kind of muck up your general ledger. So really exciting.
Okay. And going back to the recent webcast that we've mentioned here, there was a
Yeah.
question on correcting GL entries related to and the impact on changing on making updates to dimensions. Is that right?
Yeah, so that was actually a really great question in the webcast that I had not tested through. So I actually went in the webcast and tested through, and the question was if you change the dimension or correct it on a general ledger entry, so on the ledger entries, does that also change it on the posted document as well? So if that general ledger entry flowed through from maybe a purchase invoice or a sales invoice, and you change the dimension on the ledger entry, we tested, and that does not actually appear to change the dimension on a posted document. Which I think that this is probably what Microsoft intended because, for the most part, you're using your ledger entries for reporting, to look at past transactions, those types of things. However, you may have an inconsistency if you're changing a dimension on a ledger entry and then going back and maybe comparing that to your posted document lines. So it was a great question, and it was interesting to see that. I think this is probably the way that Microsoft intended it, but very interesting to see that you'll be able to correct your dimensions on ledger entries, but still not on posted documents.
Hmm. All right. Yeah, I'm thinking back to some of the other feedback that we got in the
Yeah.
session. There was a nice audience there, and they had a variety of comments and questions as they sort of watched all these different features being explained. Another one you talked about that I thought was interesting was the use of Yodlee for bank integration for transaction imports. Is that right? And you got some feedback there.
Yeah, so there are actually three of more of the what I call the plain white Sox features around bank reconciliations at the end of the month, which these might be plain white Sox to some people, but actually I think that they are pretty exciting if you're doing bank reconciliations either at the end of the month or throughout the month. So I'll just start by kind of outlining those three additional banking features that I talked about on the webcast. And the first one is just kind of general bank reconciliation improvements in general. Using what we call the kind of new bank rec version, so the bank rec with auto match, we'll be able to go into our posted bank statements and we'll actually be able to print a report from there. So one of kind of the gripes previously was, after I post my bank reconciliation, I can't go back and print it into a format that maybe I want to save or send to my CFO for approval. So this is something that Microsoft added. And again, this is only on the new auto match bank account reconciliation. This will not work if you're still using kind of the older version, the US North American version. But they did add the ability to print a report from that posted statement. The second feature, and this is kind of where Yodlee comes into play, is that Microsoft has simplified the bank statement file import, kind of that process and how that looks. So previously from your bank, you had to have, a few very specific types of file formats that you could then import into Business Central. And it looks like now they're expanding what file formats can be exported from your bank, maybe a CSV file now, and then imported into Business Central using, the data exchange definitions, the import stuff that you've already set up. So one of the things that I actually have always recommended to users is that they use this kind of extension that you mentioned that comes with Business Central called Yodlee. And this has made it easy for me to import our bank statements directly from the bank because you're linking Business Central to your bank account using Yodlee. And at the end of every month, you can just go in and say, I want to import my transactions for March. Yodlee works its magic, looks at your bank account, and imports those transactions. So this is one thing that people use a lot. However, Yodlee doesn't necessarily work for everyone. It doesn't necessarily work perfectly with every bank. And I think we had a few comments in the webcast as well that, Yodlee has broken the integration with their bank, or they're just having, trouble using Yodlee for what they need it for. And this is something that I have heard kind of repetitively with users. And I think that Yodlee is great when it's working how you want it to, but I do know that there have been some pain points. So hopefully with this new simplified bank statement file import that Microsoft is adding, hopefully this will enable more easily importing bank transactions without having to maybe use something like Yodlee. I will probably still continue to use Yodlee because that's what works for me. But I think that Microsoft is really listening to what users are wanting, and they're trying to make it easier, knowing that not all of these banks have specific file formats for download that you might need. So hopefully that one will make it a little bit easier. And then the final kind of additional feature is around payment reconciliation journals. So this is something that you can use throughout the month to be able to reconcile transactions with your bank account. And Microsoft is adding functionality to be able to apply entries in your payment reconciliation journal to employee, like a type of employee, account type of employee. Previously, we've been able to apply to customers and vendors, but now that companies are starting to use the employee functionality more and more in Business Central, Microsoft has expanded that functionality as well. And there are a few other little things with the payment reconciliation journal as well, that users will be able to more easily post things through. So those are kind of the three bank rec improvements that I really noticed when I was going through the release notes.
All right, great. You had mentioned earlier as well, just that some of these things are long, have been requested for a long time, or people perhaps who have been using different elements of Nav and now Business Central will appreciate these. Would you say any of these in particular are ones that users have really been asking for sort of directly through using, like, I don't know, using Microsoft's Ideas site, or by submitting and voting on ideas, or other, I don't know, other channels that people might use to try to get to Microsoft product teams to bump priority up on different capabilities or fixes?
Yeah, for sure. And hopefully we'll be able to maybe share this link. But I know in my webcast last week, I did share kind of the ideas portal that Microsoft has for Business Central. And I just wanted to show everyone in the webcast, here's where you can go either to submit your own ideas about feature improvements that you'd like to see in Business Central. And you can also see what other people are requesting. So it's interesting because when we looked at kind of that ideas portal where users have been submitting feedback for years and years, the top two that we saw that people had voted on, you can actually go in there, and if you see that somebody else has a great idea, like we'd like to be able to correct dimensions on ledger entries, you can actually vote and say, hey, this is awesome. Like, I want to see this in there too. So the top two that had the most votes were what I just mentioned that Microsoft released on the dimensions. So more control over the allowed values for dimensions, as well as dimension corrections on general ledger entries. So I really recommend going to this site, even if you don't have any, great ideas of your own, or you don't know exactly what you'd like to see different. It really helps to kind of look through what other people on there are saying. And you might even say, oh yeah, this would really be nice if we could do this. And you can go ahead and vote on it. And I think that really just shows too that those top two with the most votes, those features are now actually making it into this new release. So Microsoft really is listening to what users want, but they don't know what you want unless you put it out there. So I highly recommend, whenever you're in your system and you're complaining about how something works, or, you think it could be better, or you wish it was better, go to that ideas portal and see first if somebody has already submitted it, because it's likely that if you're having that issue, somebody else is as well. And vote for that idea. Or if it's not on there, go ahead and submit the idea on your own and, see if other users vote for it, because it's very possible that you might ask for it now, and then you might get your Christmas maybe in October of this year with the Wave 2 release. So it's really great to see that Microsoft is listening to user feedback.
Yeah, great point. I've always wished I had a way to help people sort of lobby for their favorite ideas more. Actually, I mean, we do. I'd welcome anyone to sort of, write an article promoting an idea that they think is a good one, or that they submitted, and we can link to the ones that you just mentioned, just as just as a reference, or maybe you have some other favorite ones that you're sort of rooting for right now that you created or that you voted on. But yeah, no, you hear that all the time from Microsoft, and I don't know how many people will go on if they don't have a specific idea themselves to submit, or as opposed to looking through what's there and voting up the good ones, right?
It's kind of funny that you mentioned that, because I'll just say I'm a little bit of a hypocrite in the fact that I really should save that link in my favorites, because every time I think I have a suggestion or I'm complaining to somebody about how it works, so like, we'll put it on the ideas portal. I'm like, yeah, I know, but I forget where the link is. So I'll just say that I really should also be doing a better job about putting my ideas out there, just glancing a little bit more often what is out there instead of just around, the release time. And one of my things that I think has not really improved upon a whole lot in Nav and Business Central is the intercompany functionality. So for anybody listening to this who actually is using intercompany functionality, I would think that they'll probably agree with me. So I probably should actually hop on there on the ideas portal and see what's been suggested to make that easier. But yeah, I would recommend, once you have that link, bookmark it on your browser so that it's right there, whenever you actually need to make a suggestion. And I should be better about that as well.
All right, excellent. So, I guess maybe a bit downstream from sort of this release wave, does the introduction of these new capabilities then feed into what you end up working with your clients on, going into the spring, the summer?
Yeah, I think they definitely do. And it's funny because, we might be working with some users for over the course of a few months. And maybe in January and February, I showed them, here's how we need to correct dimensions on a posted transaction. We can't just go back and change it. We need to do a reclassing journal. Or we're talking about something around bank reconciliations. And I say, well, you can't actually go back and print a report once you've posted it. And it's really exciting to see, how excited they are when I show them, here's what's going to be new in the system. This is actually going to be so much easier for you. So we're constantly trying to keep up with all the new changes, make sure that in our trainings we're including, I think we have a controllers boot camp coming up in mid-April where we talk about dimensions. And it's the perfect time for us to be able to kind of just show everyone, hey, look what's coming in Business Central. You'll be able to do so much more with dimensions. So we're kind of constantly tailoring our training and our, work with users to be able to show them the latest and greatest. And it's really cool to see them get as excited as I get kind of about these things, because it's, it really just does help people, it just makes their lives a lot easier, especially, these new features around month end.
Yeah, sure. All right. Very good. Well, Cari, thanks so much for taking the time to do this. I think this was sort of a nice wrap up to those other two things that you spent so much time on and presented to our readers and our audience. So I really appreciate you doing this. And I hope we can chat again as sort of new more gifts roll out in the fall or
absolutely
next April too.
Yeah, I'll just say too, if you haven't already checked out the article or the webcast that I think I just did last week, I think that recording's up there. I had a lot of really good links and resources there as well. So definitely check those out. Just get out there, click on those links and just see what resources are out there for end users. So thanks so much, Jason. Hopefully we can talk again in the future.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks once again to Cari Corozza for joining me today and also for taking the time to write about some of these topics and present to our audience about them. We have links to both the article and the webcast in the show notes. And that will do it for today. If you want to get in touch with me, you can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. You can also find us on Twitter and on LinkedIn. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.